So glad you're with us here on FaithWorks Live. And as you probably know, we have a front row seat to the presidential process. And right now we have all eyes focused on who's going to be the top contender in 2024. But what happens in 2025? Is there a plan in place? No matter who wins, really, we have to be focused on the future. We need a more pro-liberty, pro-America, pro-constitutional future. Or is that just, a pipe dream out the window with the powdered wigs, like it's never coming back? I believe it is possible, and we can do it, according to our next guest. Spencer Chretien is the Associate Director of the 2025 Presidential Transition Project over at the Heritage Foundation. And Spencer, you happen to be in our fine state of Iowa as we speak. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Rebecca. And it's great to be at the Iowa State Fair and meeting so many people.
What's going on out there? Obviously, you're probably covering the presidential cavalcade. How are you enjoying it so far?
I'm enjoying it a lot. The food is interesting and good. We've got, we've seen coverage of the presidential candidates who've been out here. So everybody's focused on Iowa, and for good reason. But we're getting ready also, not just for 2024, but also for 2025, and making sure that the next president is in a position to succeed and that the American people hopefully are going to get what they voted for. Mm-hmm. And we will deconstruct the administrative state that you see all the candidates talking about that.
Absolutely. Well, and that was going to be my next question is, do you believe that the people that are out in the current crop of candidates, do they understand the moment that we're in? Meaning, do they see the desperation that I think a lot of people feel right now about the future of the country? And do they understand the depth, like the amount of work that it's going to take to deconstruct the deep state?
I think so. I think, people are waking up to the fact that we've got out of control federal agencies. And I think everybody who has previously served in or voted for a conservative administration has stories of, both of when we succeeded, but also things we left on the table. And, the left is very good at government. And so they're ahead of us when it comes to the art of governmental effectiveness. They're always thinking about presidential transitions. We need to build that infrastructure and bridge those gaps on the right. Okay. And that's what we're doing at Project 2025. And people can get involved also at project2025.org and sign up to be a part of bringing Mr. Smith and Mrs. Smith to Washington to serve the next president.
Absolutely love that reference. It is my all-time favorite movie. So now you're my all-time favorite guest. Thank you, Spencer. But I believe that it's possible. It's just going to take a lot of work. And I think it might help to know where we've gone wrong. Like in our lifetimes, I'm probably maybe just slightly older than you are. It's hard to tell from a profile photo. But it seems like, I was born during the latter part of the Reagan era. And so there have been these Republican victories, right? We think of Reagan, we think of Newt Gingrich, the contract with America, and then more recently, the Tea Party, right? And of course, Donald Trump, and there was a red wave in 2016. So what happened and why are we here now on what feels like we're just teetering on the edge of a progressive stranglehold? What did conservatives do with those victories?
Well, it's a great question. You're not that much older than I was. I was born in the first Bush administration. But we have a situation where the bureaucracy has grown to be more than 2 million full-time non-military federal employees. And then you have between 16 and 20 million federal contractors. And sitting atop that bureaucracy, you only have traditionally between 3,000 and 4,000 political appointees who are the people who actually can get hired and fired by the president, who serve at the pleasure of the president. That's not a lot of people. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. The political composition of D.C. is not great for conservative thought. And so we have these built-in disadvantages. And we've kind of, I think there's been a philosophy in some cases of conservatives saying, look, we want a small government, so we're not going to really care, what goes on in the workings of government. We're not going to really take ourselves into it. We just want to reduce it. And I'm all for small government, but the reality is you need people there on the president's behalf to aggressively and robustly provide political oversight of this massive bureaucracy. Otherwise, you'll never get anything through. They will outweight you. You know, a president has a 4-year term, but Dr. Fauci had his job for about 42 years. You know, so they can outlast you if you're elected president.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I saw when in living color in the last few years, especially during the Trump administration. I think a lot of conservatives were very pleased with many of the stands that Donald Trump took, that the average American, it seems like, was a lot better off than they are right now, currently, back then. But we also saw the depth of the deep state is often like the sloganeering term, but even with the idea of draining the swamp and going in with that, it seemed like it was an uphill battle to do anything, to cut anything, any department. I mean, he had to fight tooth and nail, and a lot of that was unsuccessful. And I don't know if it was that he didn't I mean, you worked in the Trump administration as well. I wonder if it was just like we didn't realize how big a fight we had ahead of us. And do we even fully understand the extent of what we're facing now?
Well, I definitely think we're closer to understanding it because I think the conservative movement is waking up to, to the need to get our people involved in the bureaucracy itself. I think in the Trump administration, you're right. We had a lot of successes. People were better off. But I also think that, there's always things that we learned that we're going to take next time for the next conservative president in 2025. And, part of it is this view that we shouldn't fill all the positions, the political appointments. Part of it is just the inertia of the bureaucracy. And then, also when our people come to Washington, they're not trained up ahead of time, which is something that we're changing through Project 2025 and our Presidential Administration Academy. But when you arrive at an agency to work on behalf of the president, there's not an owner's manual sitting there. There's not a guidebook, and the career deep state people are very good at delaying or tripping you up or tricking you into something or, taking something out of context. And they can gum up the works pretty effectively. So we had a lot, I think by the end of the Trump administration, we kind of had it figured out, the personnel and the policies. But we were for next time, whoever the next conservative president is, we're building on what we've learned, but also we're building on our successes, but we're also learning from those things we left on the table.
Yeah. Well, just like you mentioned, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, that is exactly the plot, where you've got someone that, is an idealist and, wild-eyed hopes and dreams of making it a better future according to the Constitution. And then he trusts the people that are already in power. And they lead him down the primrose path because they're going to show him the ropes. And then suddenly he has to become, he becomes the villain. They lambast him. And I guess that's a movie review for another day, but that does happen.
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen before with good, solid, well-meaning conservatives. And they get kind of tucked under the wing of the people that have been there before to show them the ropes. And then suddenly they're voting on things. And I'm like, why on earth did you vote that way? Because that's just how it's done. And I think it takes an awful lot of, I don't think it makes them bad people, but I do think they need to be better prepared to come in against exactly what it is that we're fighting against. And I think as conservatives, and I'll speak for myself individually, we're really big on the why. We really want to be involved in politics because we care about life, liberty, the future of the country, our posterity, and all this is why we fight, but we're not always great on the how. And we're not as well informed or as tenacious about strategy. So let's say we do actually get conservatives elected. What do we do next? And how do we start rolling back some of the overreach and the corruption in Washington?
Those are great points that you make. We need to become masters of bureaucratic effectiveness and public administration, just like the left is. And we need to still have the why, but also have the how. And, one way is it really, the type of people who are going to come to Washington in 2025 to work for the next conservative president, they need to be people who are willing to work long hours, you know, engage in gross office battles against the deep state, and you know, not just be there to pad their resume. We want people who have paid a personal price. We call Project 2025 the coalition of the canceled. We want people to come to Washington who have paid a price for standing firm and who are going to be willing to work hard, put in long hours, and you know, if you have the right values and the willingness to work hard and the political savvy is very important. If you have those things, you'll learn the other stuff. You'll learn how to become a policy expert or how to, you know, navigate an agency in Washington, D.C. The main thing is that you've got the political savvy and the right values so that you can deliver on behalf of the president.
And to know that I think you're not alone in Washington, D.C. I mean, as fundamental as that sounds.
Absolutely.
I'm looking at your nice summary on Project 2025 on heritage.org, and you mentioned that there are at least 45, maybe more, different conservative organizations that are combining forces to help prepare conservatives for this next journey into the future in 2025, which hopefully will be headlined by a strong conservative in the White House. But there's an awful lot more governing to do. So can we talk a little bit about some of the 4 pillars that you mentioned that help lay this groundwork for 2025?
Sure. Well, I think I wrote that back earlier this year, and since then we've had more organizations join. We're actually now more than 70 partner organizations on our advisory board. Yeah, and you know, there's groups that are inside DC and outside DC, and groups focused on, you know, life and family, groups focused on fiscal issues. Really, we've got the whole movement coming together to get ready for the next president. And that doesn't mean we don't have our little differences sometimes, but it's the goal is to be like a snowball rolling down the hill that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. But the project is divided into 4 pillars. The first pillar is our policy book. It's called Mandate for Leadership, and it's available at project2025.org. And it goes chapter by chapter, and every chapter corresponds to one federal agency. So some people think when they hear that you work for the president, they think you work in the White House. And for most people, that's actually not true. Where the action takes place is at the federal agencies, like the State Department or the Department of Interior, the Department of the Treasury, or some examples of that. And so every chapter has a primary author and a team of contributors. And we had about 400 people who collectively wrote this book. It was a lot of cats to herd. But the book came out, Mandate for Leadership. It came out in April 2023, and it's 900 pages. But if you are interested in one agency or 2 agencies, you can go read the blurb for what a conservative success, what a conservative vision looks like at that agency. That's the first pillar, and it's complete. You know, we've given the book to the candidates and their staff, and we're trying to get it out as widely as possible. The second pillar is our presidential personnel database. Now, I worked in the presidential personnel office for President Trump. And so this is what I mentioned earlier, those 3,000 to 4,000 people traditionally who work for the president. All those appointees are hired through the presidential personnel office. And so we are recruiting the staff for the next president through our presidential personnel database. And it's at project2025.org. And our vision is that everybody, this will be a talent database where you can tell us what agencies you're most interested in, what experiences you have, what political campaigns you've donated to or volunteered on, and come into this database. And that's the second pillar. And then the third pillar is our Presidential Administration Academy. This gets people trained up ahead of time. What I was talking about earlier, you don't find a handy dandy guide sitting on your desk when you arrive at an agency. So what we've done is we've put together a series of training videos. We've got 17 of them live now. And it explains, our academy explains, here's how to get a security clearance. Here are the things to watch out for. Here's how to deal with the media. Here's how to, what is the political hiring process like? All of those questions are answered through our Presidential Administration Academy, and that's the third pillar. And then the fourth and final pillar is what we call our playbook. And that is, it's kind of the longest term aspect of the project. and the least public facing. But Pillar 4 is about preparing the transition plan for each federal agency, taking the big ideas in the big 900-page book and figuring out, okay, well, what actually needs to happen to make these a reality. And when we have a nominee a year from now, we will be, turning over our completed work to that nominee, so that we'll just be able to have a plug in, all the people and personnel and the policies and plans for the next president.
See, that sounds like a really cool strategy. And I love that you're actually equipping people to do the work. What do you think about the idea of conservatives working themselves out of a job in administration? So I'm hearing a lot. I mean, we hear a lot of different talks about how, this presidential candidate's going to come in and just clean house, and we're going to wipe out whole departments. And, I'm still waiting. Like, I love that vision too, but I have yet to see it. First, you got to get elected, and then you've got to govern. I know that. But what do you think about the prospect? And is there an actual plan or strategic possibility of starting to shut down some of these, bloated bureaucracies, which frankly, many of them are unconstitutional, or at the very least, they're working against a constitutional vision for the country?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, the reality is that if an agency was created through an act of Congress, you need Congress to pass another act repealing that. And the reality is that, as you and I both know, Congress really doesn't pass many things. And what they do pass in Congress includes a lot of language about how the secretary shall. So they basically, Congress has outsourced its legislating to the bureaucracy. And that's where we got to be as conservatives. Ours is a project that's primarily focused on the executive branch. Now, we'll work closely with our partners on the Hill and Congress. But I would say the number one thing that needs to happen is we need an army of political appointees to come to Washington, work at these agencies, work at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, work at the Department of Agriculture, all appointees rowing in the same direction, implementing the president's vision at those agencies. And, you'll see in our book, we call for the elimination of various agencies. And certainly that is the aspiration. But I think it's important that we also have a plan B, because Congress isn't always just going to legislatively eliminate an agency or an office.
Yeah, I know you got a lot going on, Spencer. What gives you hope as you look forward to 2025? Which, if the Lord tarries, is coming up here in just a couple of years. So what do we look forward to? Hopefully a conservative victory in 2024, I'm sure would be a good first step. What gives you hope?
Well, what gives me hope is that the conservative grassroots are fired up about Project 2025. We're seeing a good reaction from people. We have a lot of organizations that are participating now, that have reached out wanting to join, and it really is, an organically growing effort. So that gives me hope. And then I also am given hope by the reality that the candidates, you hear them talking a lot about the importance of deconstructing the administrative state. You hear them talking about the importance of ending the weaponized, woke government and the two tiers of justice in our country. And so they're all talking about it. And I think that's because they've heard the voice of the conservative movement. They've heard the voice of the grassroots, and they're ready to not only build on past conservative successes that we've had, but also go even further and learn from the mistakes as well.
All right. Spencer say the last name for me one more time.
Chretien.
Thank you so much. Spencer Chretien has been our excellent guest, and really appreciate you making time for us, especially as you're on the job in our fine state. Enjoy your time in Iowa. One last and important question. Do you commit to trying deep fried meatballs on a stick?
Yes, I will do it.
Promise, no backsies.
I will eat a lot of things on a stick.
I will attempt. Okay. There's actually this year, there's
stuff.
a smoothie on a stick, which I find impressive. That's our Iowa ingenuity.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate your
Nice.
time today, Spencer. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your
Yeah,
vision
thank you
for the
very much.
future. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Check out the work that Spencer's doing at heritage.org. Look up Project 2025. I'll go ahead and link it down below.